Jamil, querido, vou pedir que você permaneça, por favor.
Jamil, I'm going to ask you to remain on stage. And talking about the integration of an African continent is not a conversation that will last a short time. We have 55 countries involved here. So integration is a trademark that the African continent has sought because there's no other place in the world, no other continent where we have so many countries trying to create a movement. So we are going into our second panel now, and so I will once again ask our Mr. Jamil Sadi to stay here to act as moderator, as the panel. And we're going to be talking about the synergy between Brazil and Africa in the agricultural sector. They have some things in common, fertile ground, climate that is similar. And so now we're going to be talking about agro-industry and how to boost trade and food supply chain between Brazil and Africa. Jamil, thank you once again.
You'll have to bear with me for another hour, sorry for this. So this time we're going to talk about food supply and how to boost this specific trade between Africa and Brazil. And once again, we have a great team of experts. And I'm going to call here Mr. Roberto Rodrigues, former Minister of Agriculture of Brazil and coordinator of the Center for Agribusiness Studies at FGV. And you may not know, he's a fan of the best football team in the world. Well, we used to be, and he's a great singer. Also, we would like to call Mr. Akin Bajimo. He's the Executive Director of the Forum for Agriculture Research in Africa. Sir, please join us. Good morning, sir. Please. And also Mr. Felipe Rubini. He's the CEO of Grupo Fictor. Please, sir, if you could join us. Come on. So, have a seat. As we all know, and we heard a little bit in the previous panel, that yes, Brazil is a prominent player in the ag business, combining a profound knowledge of the market, a competitive export sector, and a champion in crop yields. That is obviously something that we all know. But we have on the other side of the Atlantic, we have a continent in a growth path, as we just heard, one that will have 1 in 4 inhabitants of the planet in the next couple of decades, and that is willing, as you just mentioned, sir, to learn or to adopt and also to teach us the way forward. So my first question goes to the three of you, and I'd like to have a little bit of your thoughts on this. What can Brazil offer to Africa, and what Africa can offer to Brazil in the segment of ag business and food supplies?
Thank you, Jamil, very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I thank very much to Mr. João Bosco, my good friend, for inviting me to this important event. But I don't speak English, as you can listen. I speak English like Tarzan used to do. So if you allow me, I will speak in Portuguese. May I?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Bom.
Well,
You have here.
Yes. Oh, fantastic. Here.
Filha, não funciona esse meu aqui.
Well, Jamil, I would like to digress a bit related to your question. Looking at the world, the messy world we live in at the moment, it seems like there is a major issue that all governments should be looking at, which is development. And to try and solve the worst things that are happening on our planet. But there are some topics that go beyond what the government can do, and no citizen in the world is exempt from, which is food security, energy security, and climate security. So I'm using security for all of these areas. So the climate issues, environmental issues, and so these three universal issues will be solved mainly by agriculture. Now, obviously, there are many things that need to be discussed. When it comes to the energy matrix that we have in Brazil, 50% of our energy comes from renewable sources, and majority of that comes from biomass. And so the environmental issue, we are all trying to find solutions for that problem. But which agricultural business is going to solve the issue for the planet? The tropical agriculture from Brazil, sub-Saharan Africa. So we have huge potential in the tropical area because we have land to increase our production, and we have a low productivity that needs to be increased with technology. So in this strip of land, we are going to see growth unquestionably in the next few years. But who has the best tropical sustainable technology for agricultural with data that leave no margin for doubt is Brazil. So I'll give you just 2 or 3 statistics here for grains, for example. From the 90s, when we started with our President Collor, there was an adjustment there were some adjustments in the laws that gave traction to the agro-industry in Brazil. And so the planted area with grains grew 107%, and the production of grains grew 475%. So this was the result of technology that was used, and this growth exploded with the stabilization of our economy in Brazil. So starting in that area, I started working then. You will understand this, Felipe. Most of my income was overnight. Now, for example, if the price for an acre of soy field wasn't paid for, we had to have subsidies to make our agro-industry more competitive. So this was, or better, we depended, the agro-industry in Brazil depended on our economic stability. And so how do we explain that? We have in Brazil 73 million, actually 51 million, but we, with grains, that is our yield. But we have 2 crops that are harvested with grains per year. And so together that is 73 million reais. So the productiveness per hectare that we had in the 90s, for example, we would have to have 127 more million hectares planted to reach what we have today. Because our tropical agriculture is so sustainable that it helped to preserve the biomes in different areas in the Cerrado. So we have sustainability as part of our DNA, we could say, of the agricultural industry in Brazil. When we talk about cattle raising for meat production, what is meat production? It's grains plus the animal to produce animal protein. What about when we talk about the other types of meat production in Brazil? The bovine or the beef cattle takes longer to produce, and we have fewer fields being used for cattle raising. So this is just an example, or just to give you context about the technology that was developed fundamentally in the Cerrado area in the middle of Brazil, which are and that can be replicated in sub-Saharan Africa and also in other areas in Latin America. And this already happens, the replication of these technologies. Excuse me here. Old people usually have some type of something that's rusted or clogged. Okay, so this technological role of Brazil is perfectly replicable in these other areas, in this tropical area of the planet also. What I dare to say here, ladies and gentlemen, is that today Brazil has the technological standard for sustainable agro-industry that can be replicated in these other tropical areas, that could be responsible for ending hunger, could be responsible for producing much more sustainable sources of energy, and that can organize the environmental issues in the same direction that we have for sustainable energy. So that was what I wanted to say at the moment.
Preview of what you were going to say to us there. But I go back to my question. What can Brazil offer to Africa, and what can Africa offer to Brazil?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I want to pay tribute to the former minister, if I'm correct, by the introduction, and for great leadership of what Brazil offers. Now, let me start with a few statistics, and I'm very happy that he was speaking about the strength of Brazil in technology, especially in the field of agriculture, and especially one thing that Brazil is known for has been the enormous and phenomenal transformation of the Cerrados. Now, 10 years ago, as I said, when I came to Embrapa and I learned the awesome story of how Brazil moved from being a food importing country into a food exporting country, one key thing that struck me as a Nigerian, Nigeria at that time was 200 million by population. Brazil, also 200 million by population. So that's the first parallel. But then, that's where it ends. Only 6% of Brazilians are in agriculture. So if you like, 12 million people, and they are exporting. But I go back home, 200 million people, over 70% in agriculture, 140 million in agriculture, and we are importing. Something is not adding up. In a country or a continent that is consistently graduating agriculture graduates, and the food import bill is on the rise, something is not adding up. But when you look at the numbers, we've got in Africa 75% of the remaining arable lands on the world, in the planet. We've got 80% of fresh water in Africa. We've got the highest number of young people in Africa, but we have the highest number of hungry people. Something is not adding up. And again, this is why this is my sole interest in Africa-Brazil Forum. Just to understand how and where is Brazil winning. Now, one individual, and you will know him, Alphonse Paulinelli, a former Minister of Agriculture of this country. I met him in Iowa, and he really gave me an inspiration about 10 years ago as then I was just taking on the role of the Executive Director of the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa. And that was how the bond between Africa and Viçosa, the university there, started. And as we speak, we have put 120 Nigerians, and my ambassador is in the room. He actually spoke before me a short while ago. We have 120 Nigerians in Brazilian universities just to have a kind of a hand-holding experience, and Suply, right there to understudy how is Brazil winning this war against poverty and food insecurity. And we have also advanced, we've gone a little further. Liberia is now also going to be sending citizens from Liberia, from Nigeria, and from the Comesa zone. We've started negotiation with that just to see how can we handhold. People said it a lot of times. There is a lot that draw Africa and Brazil together than separate us. So there are many things we can learn. When you look at how Brazil transitioned from a food importing country, it is based on the power of science, technology, and innovation. And Brazil has done so well that only 6%, many of the countries that are exporting food to Africa have just single digits of its population in agriculture. And they have consistently done this through the power of science, technology, and innovation. But that's what Brazil can offer Africa on a South-South collaboration basis. Now, the big question, what can Africa offer Brazil? Now, one thing that we have in abundance is, as I said, the youth, the young population, and abundant natural resource that is just waiting. And that's what I said when I gave the statement that in theory and practice is the same. All we had in the last session, most of it can be alluded to as theories. But in practice, they're not the same, because we have seen a 10-year window where Africans became poorer and more hungry. Whereas Africa still has the highest potential to transform and transition into a food self-sufficient continent. Why is it not happening? So that potential is there, and that's something that Africa can put on the table, that the cooperation Brazil-Africa needs to build on. And this, for me, is something that continues to fuel my interest in coming to this forum, wherever it holds. I'm waiting for that Kairos moment when I can see something that pops up and say, yes, we've got it. We have something to take to Africa, and Africa has something to bring to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Philip.
Uma boa tarde a todos.
Well, good afternoon. I'd like to begin here saying that for the first time in history, the world is moved by money, but I think for the first time in history, funds like BlackRock and others are positioning themselves in terms of commodities, energy transition, and innovations focused on agro-business and the agro-industry. So visiting the world and talking to these different investment firms, for all of them, Brazil see Brazil as the top player in the next few decades. And when we talk about agribusiness and the agro-industry, I like to point out, and as our former minister pointed out, Brazil wasn't self-sufficient in terms of food production. And basically in 2 decades, we went from the need of importing food to becoming the largest food producer in the world. This year, Brazil is going to feed 1.7 billion people around the world, and the tendency is that this will increase with our investment in technology and better use of land. We will be able to feed basically half of the world in the next 10 to 15 years. These are validated data, and I think our main connection and what we can teach our African brothers, because I consider Africa to be the closest continent in terms of culture and history to Brazil. And the secret to agribusiness is not only the production, but value the productive chain and to know how to deal with inflation. The biggest villain to agribusiness is inflation and to our productive chain. So in Brazil, we have learned how to deal with and play with the inflation fluctuations, and even with all of our, mistakes and during the last periods, we've learned how to deal with that. So when I'm talking with these different investment funds, I like to tell them of all the opportunities, huge opportunities in Brazil, and especially the connection to Africa. Many countries in Africa are still hostage to a system that's very oppressive, that keeps them from buying and exporting, producing. And with changes in the financial system, these things have become easier. And so the ideal, in my view, is for Brazil to become closer to Africa and to export this technology to Africa and growing this partnership with Africa. Because not only the similarities that we have between our land is great, but we can learn from each other in terms of how to be more efficient in our work, and also in believing that African countries are able to become self-sufficient in a short period of time. If I'm not mistaken, the continent produces only 16% of their food needs. And in Brazil, so Brazil would be able to help African countries to increase that in a short period of time. And now, focusing more on my company itself, we already work in the DRC. We are also starting to talk to other countries. And there are many opportunities, not only financial opportunities, but to help make changes, actual changes. When you see the result of what you have been implementing with governments, and especially in terms of the inflation, when you see the results reflected in the full product chain and the supply chain, that's very amazing to see that. And I think they will be able to increase their food production and become more self-sufficient. And also to make this self-sufficiency more possible, to make this growth a real possibility, because what's most important for the world is food. Right? So that's what I believe, and so that's what I have been talking about with all these investment funds that I visit.
Ask questions.
Yes.
What did you do to get that? What can we do to do? Well, let me try to answer you about this in Portuguese again. Thank you.
the three main factors that allowed this big boom in Brazil. So actually, in 1970, 50 years ago, we imported 30% of what we consumed in 1970. And then the government at that point could not admit that a country such as ours would import food. So they have taken some measurements, some strategic attitudes. The first of them was technology. So Brazilian agriculture was based on the coast. The consumption was by the coast. The population was living in the coast. The Middle East of Brazil, or the savannah, was not considered, as they were considered as infertile, dried land. First of all, first thing that has been done was to master the savannah, to conquer the savannah, transforming savannah from a not fertile soil into a productive soil. So the savannah has become a big arable land in Brazil, allowing us to become food exporters. So first, technology, sustainable tropical technology. Then we had Embrapa. Embrapa is this agricultural research company created in 1973, and in 74, under Alisson Paulinelli, the Minister of Agriculture, they have hired 1,500 technicians, sending them to the whole world, the US, Australia, Europe, Asia, to learn technological routes, how to use the technology. After 3 years, they came back to Brazil, and they got this order: tropicalize that, so localize that. And they made a revolution, mastering the savannah and doing this. So first of all, technology. Second point, entrepreneurship. So how does this happen? The government at that point decided to attract to the savannah farmers from other regions, particularly from the southern Brazil, from Rio Grande do Sul, which is a state in the very south Brazil that had a very strong European culture, particularly from Italians, Germans, and some Dutch and others like Spanish and Portuguese, but the main strength were from Italians and Germans. They were attracted to the southern Brazil at the end of the 20th century, with the end of the slavery, and this labor has got small pieces of land, but their families have grown with this ability to work on the land. So the government has given credit so those families could buy land in the Middle East Brazil. So they have bought 1,500 hectares in the Middle East Brazil, and they have taken their technical skills and credit. So there was a public policy made by the Brazilian government that encouraged the entrepreneurship of them. And thirdly, something very important was cooperativism. So the main development in Savannah was called the PRODECER, which stands for the Program of the Savannah, made by the Japanese government and the Brazilian government together, because Japan didn't have food. So the investments from Japan through agricultural cooperatives that has settled in the Savannah, allowing to produce food to export to Japan. So technology, public policies, entrepreneurship with cooperatives made this process to succeed. So I believe those 3 points can be replicated in Africa. By the way, with an advantage, we import fertilizers, we import phosphorus from Morocco. So you have Morocco so close to you. And Morocco, by the way, would like to make partnership with Brazil and Japan to develop this savanna in Africa. So I believe that we should have a kind of a mechanism where we could transfer technology and at the same time incentives, policies to cooperativism. That would be crucial. Why? In a globalized economy, the margin is becoming increasingly less, so the revenues in agriculture is made on scale. But small farmers cannot have scale because they're small. So how can they do this with cooperatives, adding value to their production? So I would highly recommend you to assess the possibility, to consider the possibility of working with technology transfer through cooperatives with public policies that would encourage this process. And with this, I think we can quickly solve the problem of agriculture in all African countries.
We can conclude here. No,
At least it's a beginning. A good beginning, at least.
absolutely. Mr. Kimbanyo, allow me to ask you a question.
Just call me Yemi.
Yemi. Okay, thank you. Because what Roberto said is a very sustainable and a long process plan, basically, that requires obviously a strategy. It requires somehow a stability to make this happen. What we saw in the last 2-3 years in the world market in terms of food is a drastic disruption because of one specific conflict in the world that, as far as I know, generated a lot of issues, absolutely, and especially in Africa. How much does this show that the current system is broken?
Right. Let me draw an analogy here. Each time I look at a parallel, and thank you so much for reiterating the story that I heard from Alison Paulinelli about a decade ago. And it resonates in me that, Brazil got it right. And it also tells me Africa needn't look left or right. The blueprint of a successful transition is right before us. Now, the analogy I was going to draw is this, and please listen to me carefully about this. When we make the comparison between Brazil and Africa, it is like leading an elephant with just one cord, and the elephant follows. That's one country. Africa is like leading 54 sheep and goats, and they run in different directions. The dynamics are completely different because of fragmentation. So we have fragmentation in policies, we have fragmentation in many multidimensional fragmentations that continuously inhibit the progress we're looking for. I mean, one minister, Alison Paulinelli, could, in the space of 10, 15, 20 years, follow a coherent policy agenda and follow it to fruition. But 2003, exactly 20 years ago, all leaders in Africa met in Maputo, came to a decision: we're going to set up what is called the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program 20 years ago. 10 years down the line, 2013, nothing shifted. And then in 2014, they moved from Maputo, they moved to Malabo. And in Malabo, they all made another declaration of what is called the African Agricultural Acceleration Program. But we're now 10 years down the line, making 20 years in the life of a food-dependent continent. That's a long while. So our challenges are enormous, and they are multifactorial and multi-levels. So it's not going to be a walk in the park. It's not going to be an easy road, but Brazil remains an inspiration. If Brazil could do it with the same agroecological conditions, we only need to re-evaluate our political system, reassess our capacities, and we should be able to make the meaningful, or as I put it, shift the needle. Now I'll give another practical example of one of the things on we do and how not to do it. The last panel spoke at length on how it is that Africa is majoring in minors. We continue to glorify ourselves as the chief producers of raw materials. Now that's the narrative of yesteryears. I'll give you a direct example. The largest producers of cocoa globally is still Africa. When you are in Africa, the cocoa farmer is not rich enough to buy the chocolate. Fancy that. A dairy farmer in Netherlands can eat cheese. But a cocoa farmer in Africa cannot buy cocoa, cannot buy chocolate. Why? In the world market today, 1 kilogram of cocoa is $1.6 US, but 1 kilogram of chocolate is $250 US. Where is the $248? And all of this is based on the fact that Africa puts its hand in the pocket outside the farm gate. We do nothing outside farm gate. Now, any country that is still doing that will remain poor for life. And as I said it, the first thing is technology. The second thing is entrepreneurship. And I forgot the third point. But cooperativism, yes. So those three elements build Brazil out. First element of technology that he said, Africa has the lowest technology capital in the world. Lowest scientific capital. I have been executive director of the Forum for Agricultural Research for 10 years. I struggled. We do not have the scientific capacity to make the shift. So why? I mean, if you took out Embrapa out of Brazilian system, it goes down in agriculture. If Embrapa wasn't there to provide the scientific backup today, Embrapa is doing gene editing, is doing CRISPR, is doing everything you can do in agricultural technology today is doable in Brazil. Why? Because the government chose to invest in the capacities of its own citizens. Today, Africa is still sending people overseas to go and do masters, to go and do PhD. Today, Brazil doesn't send nobody out for PhD or masters. I have it on good authority. The capacity is here to build and continue to. So we need to learn something from Brazil. Unless, and this is from an African proverb, and I close on that, your neighbor will not help you to build your granary. Because the moment you have a granary, you stop buying grains from your neighbor. So basically, the salvation of Africans is in the hands of Africans. And it's time that Africa chooses to look, how did Brazil got out of poverty, and learn the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Philip, turning to you and turning to the private sector, what can the private sector's experience teach us about the management, and specifically in the management of addressing food insecurity? How can this be translated into dealing with elements of these two very important talks here?
Muito bom. Vamos lá. Primeiro,
Well, great. Well, first of all, I'm very happy to hear Mr. Roberto's comments because that aligns with our thinking in about these bilateral partnerships with other countries. And Jamal, what you said about a family that has a farm, that are farmers, but they aren't able to, get their product out. That goes back to not valuing the productive chain and dealing with inflation. So what the private sector, one of our initiatives with the DRC was to sit down with the government officials there and to give them our opinion about how they could have less devaluation of their currency and to add greater value to what they produce, especially based on the mineral resources that they have. And so the value given to the productive chain and the inflation issues, that has to do with how easy it is to take out these assets. And the more difficult that is, the harder it is to have that economic or financial value. And so then their currencies are devalued, and it doesn't offer that economic safety and political safety also that the financial market likes to see when they are going to invest. So the private sector wants to know that when they invest, they are going to get their profit, that it's going to be a secure investment, that they'll go back home with their profit without having any exaggerations in this investment. So we like to say that a good deal, good business deal, is good for both sides. So in our first experience with the African continent, what we have seen is that we have some opinions, some suggestions to make from the economic viewpoint, and to, especially in terms of helping them control inflation and value the productive chain, so that the country can start to become more industrialized. And through that process, the small farmers that is going to be producing there in that rural area will be able to have their products going out and getting paid for that. So these are the important things to value. If the country and the economic sector can do their homework in understanding that the secret is that the assets that are truly valuable and that are going to back up the currency need to stay in the country, that will be reflected in this, all the productive chain and in the inflation in the future, will make it easier for the country to become industrialized, because obviously the private sector would like to get their profits of what they plant and sell it there, because that will reduce the costs with logistics, with transportation, if it has to go out of the country. So, getting rid of the bureaucracy is a big part of that. That's what the private sector likes to see.
I just wanted to pick on one element, on one word that Mr. Rodriguez mentioned, which is inequality. You started with this word, basically. And I think a couple of years ago, perhaps a little bit more, WFP, the World Food Program, received the Nobel Peace Prize for a basic recognition. You don't have peace if people are hungry. That is a very straightforward. That's a very straightforward conclusion. And we were going in a good direction, I think, until 2014, 15. And as of that time, what we saw was basically an increase, a drastic increase in hunger in the world. To the point that actually the targets of 2030 by the UN may be missed if we go on as in the same pattern as we are. 2030, the targets of 2030 may be an epigraphy, basically, of a world that was supposed to be. And this is tragic. Now, my question to all of you, it is very clear that producing is not enough. The fact that we produce and we feed 1 billion people, in the case of Brazil, does not take out the fact that last year, or a couple of years ago, we had 30 million people going hungry in Brazil. So my question to all of you, what do we do to tackle this word that former minister mentioned, inequality in terms of food access? Who wants to start?
Bom,
Well, this issue is very important for Brazilian agro-industry also. Thinking about round numbers at Embrapa, we have 5 million agricultural producers in Brazil, and 1 million, do this great work and are exporting. But so 1 million is part of the market. 4 million are not part of that market. They're smaller producers, kind of on the fringes in the Northeast, but also in the other regions of the country. Not only small producers, but medium-sized producers also. What happened to them was that they didn't have access to credit, to money, to investment. They didn't have access to technology, to education, no access to the market. So all of these factors together, contributed to that. But the main one was education, because through education you have access to all these other areas. So the main part of the poor in Brazil are actually rural farmers who basically live. I wouldn't say that it's a family farming; it's a survival farming. It's a very low level of poverty, high level of poverty. Sorry. So how can we deal with this? Jamil, you know me already. My main cause that I defend is the cooperative work. As Minister of Agriculture, I took Embrapa to Ghana in a different project and to Kenya. But all of this to say that cooperativism is the main way to deal with this problem. How to incorporate this huge part of poor into the market is through cooperative work in these agricultural cooperatives. The type of cooperatives, most people don't know this, but it's a business. But it's a business that is based on values and principles that are universally accepted. No matter what country, what religion you're in, these principles and values are the same. And these principles are not known by most people. So a cooperative is an extraordinary way to guarantee to the members the condition to scale their production. That will get them into the formal market. But to get there, they need to understand what a cooperative is. And most people don't know in Brazil what a cooperative is. Very few people know what that is. We have 5 million members of cooperatives, agricultural cooperatives in Brazil, a little bit more maybe. But in the world, there's 1 billion. There are 1 billion members of agricultural cooperatives. So that's 4 billion people. It's half of the population in the planet that are parts of these agricultural cooperatives. In Asia, in Africa, it's also very small still. So I think the government, the state, needs to be like an evangelizer of what cooperatives are. What are the advantages? For example, Felipe, you know about the financial side, the credit. So the banks, they need to offer credit to the members of the co-ops. And most people don't know that members of the cooperatives, they are co-owners, and they are also investors. They invest in their own business. Since they are owners and they are users, they are known by the leadership because they have that close connection to the leadership, because the members of the cooperative are the ones that elect the leadership. So they are partners. The members are partners in that business. So they are part of the process because they are co-owners. And so the money is moving around there. The bank can offer credit. So many times, going through the normal channels of a bank, a loan, there won't be much profit. No criticism to the banks and how that works, the loan process. But in cooperatives, they have a bank, they have their own financial system. So I think that we need to bring those 4 million Brazilians that are part of these outside the formal market into the cooperative system. There are many models. Post-war in Japan, the agricultural reformation, without food, nobody would survive. So what they did was that nobody was forced to become a member, but those that did become members of the cooperatives, they had technology, they had credit. So all of these, this type of technical assistance and support, and everybody wanted to be part of a cooperative in Brazil. And today, that was a initiative of the government. The kibbutzes in Israel, the system, they were cooperatives also. So this system of cooperativism is a tool to be able to integrate people and small producers. But governments need to understand that, because what separates a developed country from an undeveloped country is the level of organization of its society, its population. The more organized a society is, the less it is subjected to different risks of being explored. So the cooperation is, that's why this is a great way that Brazil can help other countries in reducing inequalities, and even in our own country. Cooperativism is a doctrine, just like Christianity or other religions have a doctrine. So the agricultural cooperatives are like a doctrine. In the Catholic Church, a bad priest will be damaging, but you have to have a doctrine that is firm, that's going to stay permanent, in an education of that doctrine. Forgive me for being so long-winded here, but this is a passion of mine. The cooperatives are businesses, but they have to share their profits with the members. Well, I'm going to continue here because this has been like music to my ears. This is also what I believe in. It's what I've been investing in. The cooperatives are a solution for many different issues. I've been conducting some surveys in my company along with some government agencies to be able to identify that the greatest issues or problems facing the members of cooperatives aren't technology, aren't a lack of technology, because today with mobile phones, smartphones, we have information at our fingertips very quickly. The main impediment is access to this information. What's the secret to having access? Credit and working cooperatively. As you mentioned, the member of the cooperative, they know, within the system of the cooperative, they know who are the good members, which have the best results. And I have a thesis for the banking system is that giving credit through the cooperative, actually making the cooperatives become a banking agent. And it's very simple. You empower the cooperative to say which of the members will have access to credit for that productive cycle. So something that has already been implemented for the larger producers is like a CRA, instead of charging or wanting to receive in money, in cash, you receive in the production, so with the goods. So you start to create this culture within the cooperative. When one person can't deliver what is expected, then they will help each other. And so you develop that culture. And when you offer that solution to the members of the cooperative, we've seen that around 4 million of people who don't have access to this credit for their agricultural production. If you use the cooperative system to be the guarantors of this production and offering technology and investment in all of that, we estimate that in 10 years, around 10 years, Brazil would be able to produce enough food to feed the world. Because these people, as was pointed out, they are surviving with what they produce. Once they are able to produce on a larger scale with the use of technology and with the productive capacity that we have here in Brazil, and just to point out, China and India, they are collapsing. Their production they aren't able to produce as much as they need, and so anymore. So I think that is extended to Africa also. Not only Brazil would be able to supply this need, but Africa also. But I think the financial sector needs to get closer to these cooperatives in order to be able to make them into these banking agents and offering these facilities, and that's what we've been researching and trying to offer.
Se alguém tiver alguma pergunta, se alguém tiver algum comentário.
If anyone has any questions, comments.
With a little bit experience, I think my case is quite interesting because I've been working as managing director for German industry companies in Brazil for 20 years. And I've been doing business development in Latin America since 10 years. And 4 years ago, because of my experience, my headquarter asked me to do something similar in sub-Saharan Africa. So I've made a lot of experience traveling to many, many places in sub-Saharan Africa in the last years. Our company is an engineering company. We manufacture here in Brazil, and our focus is mainly mining industry, cement industry, sugar industry, energy production, and. And what I can say is, from my own experience, Brazil is still full of companies who have the know-how, the resources, ideal conditions as partners for African customers to supply what the gentleman mentioned before, tropicalized technology, which is much more fit to the needs and appropriate in acquisition for African customers. But we also have a few obstacles. One obstacle is, and this goes to all actual and former politicians in Brazil in this room, Brazil, unfortunately, since I can only comment 20 years, is definitely everything but a manufacturing industry-friendly country. Our costs are extremely high. The second obstacle is logistics. How do you want to bring your things to Africa if you talk about machines, parts? It's very complicated. I mean, in the last years, only Kenyan and Ethiopian and THE had flights from Sao Paulo to Africa. The most places I go to, I have to go through Brussels, Madrid, Paris, Frankfurt, London, whatever. A crazy situation. So logistics is not good for doing business between Brazil and Africa today. And the other point is, for sure, we must clearly see that many African customers, and even more after the COVID disaster, have to redefine priorities and have difficulties to find the money to purchase the things they need on the mid and long term and that we could supply. But Brazil, for my concern, can be an ideal partner for supplying technology and equipments and all these things to the customers in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman, yes. Sorry? The gentleman, yeah, first you, sir, and then him. And then with these three questions, we come back here.
I'm still again back. My name is Mohammed Ahmed Makarfi. I represent Nigeria in Brazil from the Nigerian embassy. Well, the issues have well been stressed regarding what Africa can offer, as well as what Brazil can offer to Africa, both ways. But one of the major challenges that has not been properly addressed, in spite of the large presence of a number of stakeholders on financing transactions, is the issue of how to leverage on the existing financial arrangements and architecture of already global finance to catapult the transfer or the partnership in exchange of technology between Brazil and Africa in various ramifications. One of the success stories would have been achieved would have been the issue of saying some Brazilian development banks and African development banks coming together to work together and see how they can fashion out over a period of time, maybe 5-10 years, how finance can be provided to support specific, identified, effective, and more impactful technologies that we identified that will be relevant to the tropics in Africa. For instance, we're talking of the Brazilian program of Grow More Food. Essentially, ABC concentrates on identifying those technologies and working with African nations across to imbibe the culture of using science and technology in the practice, and the innovation that have already been produced here, transferring them, providing a platform for training, and then sub-training and providing of machines and spare parts and so forth. The whole range of requirements needs to be first fashioned out to providing the necessary finance. Someone has just raised the issue of the challenges of logistics, travels and maritime activities between the two continents, between Latin America and Africa, and then the issues regarding financing. Today, exchange rate has been unimaginable with global financing. Dollar exchanges, for instance, in Nigerian era, has already been multiplied several times over. This happens to many other developing economies in Africa. The truth, as long as financing institutions will not work together also to support this process, I think that the success is far-fetched. Far-fetched because the nitty-gritties that are critical ingredients for this has not been fully addressed. With some of the institutions that are development finance institutions, I want someone among them to give us any success story in financing such kind of transfer of technology or innovation identified either in Brazil or anywhere else that has survived or that has been sustained in Africa. Just give me one example. So the issue is we should be talking about how to practically address this issue. I'm very happy with the former minister who was given the ABCD of how these things were achieved. You have the technology, you have the instruments of conveying it, you have willing people that are willing to take it, and you have seen the advantages and from the outputs that can be realized. All the information is available. All it needs is just to practicalize it, see how this can be put to use. And then let's see what private sector can do, what governments can do, and other stakeholders could do. I think this is the issue that we should be addressing more specifically. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The last question there on the back.
No, thank you. Sorry.
In the back.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Kim Cruz, somos que é de Moçambique também. Nós ouvimos com muito prazer a explanação.
We heard with pleasure the explanation of the minister, so in fact we know this model in the cooperatives. We are following this path through our investigations on entrepreneurship. So one of the reasons of my visit to Brazil is to visit a cooperative that was a encouragement through JICA. So we are working with them so that we can better notice how the agro-processing industry works, particularly to fruits. From everything we heard in terms of the agro-industry in Brazil, there's a component you didn't mention, which is logistics for the agriculture. 50% of the production that we could see personally of the fruit production is lost. But who are those farmers? They are small farmers, 1-2 hectares. So differently from the other colleague was saying, our problem is not only the capacity of production, because even without the industry and the technology, our production is lost. Part of it is lost. So I'd like to know, what was your experience in agro-logistics? And I don't want to see how is the agro-logistics for the export, because only our internal market is enough for us to consume, but we cannot move the fruits from north to the south and vice versa. So from the financing standpoint, I'd like to know which opportunities or financing lines we have for this infrastructure of the preservation of the agricultural production and its production, processing, and logistics as well.
Wrap up. Quem gostaria de começar? Who wants to?
So who'd like to start? So Brazil. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that it's such a shame that Brazil doesn't have a straight flight from a Brazilian airline to Africa. This is such a shame. So secondly, the biggest issue that Brazil is going through is logistics. So I can mention Rio Grande do Sul has 600 kilometers of coast and has a very old-fashioned port. So what we are doing in the private sector, we've been building silos to sort out these logistics issues. Brazil relies on trucks for the transportation of production, and unfortunately, we're still evolving in the logistics issues with railways. So we have a north-south line, then we are producing the east-west railway line, so we are investing in logistics, and the solution is a simple one. You have to build ways to export Brazilian commodities. That's true. 50% of the fruits are lost. In the last grains harvest, we would see sacks thrown throughout the highways because we have nowhere to put them. Brazil doesn't have 20% of the necessary storage needed for our production. So what we are doing, by the way, from the meetings I have had abroad, overseas, we are saying to people, invest in silos. Do not invest in other countries, but invest in silos. Invest in Brazil. We are the opportunity for commodities and logistics. Well, we have to invest on logistics. That's what we are missing, because the deficit in logistics is very big and our losses are even bigger.
Last take revolves around the conception that the future demands, food demands, only 10% will be met by increasing surface area that is cultivated, and 90% will be based on advances in technology, just like the former minister said. And when we speak about having equitable access, because the real definition of food security, if you like, from the scientific point of view, is accessibility, availability, and affordability. And this is underscoring the main fact that we can have equitable access in the future. Now, I will close by drawing the example of, I've spoken a lot about the Brazilian scenario, but if you look at the India scenario, where all the farmers are equally empowered and endowed. Indian farmers have fine access to credit, they have access to technology, and they have access to good policies. And for us, looking at the future for Africa, markets, policies, technologies, cooperativeness, as he mentioned, will become non-negotiable if we will have a future that has good food secure future, equitable participation in markets, and if we can have the development we're looking for. I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Last word to you. Última palavra para o senhor.
Rapidamente.
Okay, very quickly. What we said is, how can we get credits for that? How are we going to finance all this process? So I have to go back to cooperatives and PRODECER. PRODECER, as I said, was a program between Brazil and Japan to develop the Brazilian savanna, ensuring the exports of food to Japan, financed by Japan. The Japanese government financed the development of savanna. We produced and exported food to Japan. So how can we do this with Africa? I think, by the way, I'm sure that countries such as Japan and Brazil can collaborate as third countries. What we have done so far was good for Brazil and Japan together, and this problem is solved. Now, Brazil and Japan, or Europe and Brazil, or the US and Brazil, or anybody else who wants to develop a country in Africa, or several countries of Africa, can get together, can make an association of our technology, their capital, and the support of African countries like Morocco. Morocco is interested in helping the sub-Saharan Africa. So there are ways to do that, mechanisms that can be seen as a strategy. And who does the strategies? Governments. Governments have to get together and find a way that can produce this cooperation with the private sector. So Jamil, thank you so much for moderating this panel. It was great.
Story, so we can end this and wrap up. Many years ago, I was traveling with the then Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, and we landed in Accra. And we landed in Accra the same day this gentleman was there opening the office of Embrapa. So I went to the opening of the office of Embrapa.
Haven't you been in Benin with me also?
Yes.
To develop
yes.
fisheries cooperative there.
Don't tell them. Don't tell them.
Thank you.
So I landed there, and we went to the opening. President Lula was there. Minister Rodrigues was there. And the future looked extremely bright. I remember the energy of that day and how this energy was very, very concrete, I would say. We all know what happened after that. Not that moment, but I would say in the last 5-6 years. I hope that we don't have to come back here in perhaps 10 years and tell the story from scratch again. I hope that we can absolutely build on everything that João is doing and you all are doing, that we can look forward and take this energy with all of us. So thank you all, and I guess we go for lunch now. Thank you.
Obrigada. Faremos a nossa.
Thank you very much. We are going to take a picture as opposed to what Jamil said. We are not going to have lunch yet. I ask you please to be patient. We have to take a picture now.